Everyone, I'm back with another Unity tutorial, and today we're going to be talking about the audio mixer. The audio mixer is a new feature to Unity 5, so prior to version 5 you did not have this much control over the sound of your game. You could do quite a bit still, but a lot of people were relying on third-party applications such as WYs to handle the audio within their games, but Unity now has some pretty good tools to help you fine-tune your audio and call upon that audio within your scripts. So let's take a look at what I have here, and you should end up with something similar to what I've got by the end of this tutorial. So I have this object here, and you'll notice if I stand underneath it, you can hear that sound. It's a combination of two sound effects, and you can see all of them being passed through the mixer here. And you'll notice if I shoot it with a fireball, you'll see the snapshot change from the snapshot here to flame sound effects, which is going to raise the drone sound by 6 decibels, and it's going to enable a flanger effect on the bright home. So you can listen to that right now. So it's kind of subtle. I mean, well, actually it's really not that subtle. The flanger's pretty intense and it doesn't sound that good, but for the purpose of this tutorial, it's going to accomplish what we need. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my playback. So the first thing we need to do is make all these objects. Now I already have the prefabs, but I want to make them from the ground up so you can all see how I did this. So let me kill off that prefab. And first thing we're going to do is create that little object that I had there. So let's go up to Game Object and hit Create Empty. And over here under the inspector, we're going to hit Add Component. We're going to add a mesh filter, and we're also going to add a mesh renderer. Now for the mesh filter, click on the little circle icon here next to the mesh and do a search for prototype. And I grabbed this object. It's called Pickup Prototype. This is part of the standard assets, so you should have this available to you. I'm going to go and double click on that. And then for the mesh render, we're going to go under materials and choose element 0, click on the circle there, and we're going to grab this glass refractive material. This is another standard asset. It should make the object look a little bit see-through, so it might be a little hard to see, but it's kind of, I don't know, it looks okay, I don't mind it. So first I'm going to lower this a bit so my character can see it easier, and then I'm also going to add a mesh collider to this. So hit the add component option, go to physics and choose mesh collider. So mesh colliders are colliders that apply to objects that don't fall in the range of primitive like sphere, rectangle, square, circle, things like that. A mesh collider is going to be able to create collision around a more complex model. For instance, if I were to apply a mesh collider to my model here, it's going to do its best to apply a collider to all of the, the edges of this model instead of just giving me like a gigantic circular collider that's really bulky. It's going to be a little bit more precise. So since this object isn't necessarily a sphere all around, I just chose mesh collider because it keeps it simple for me. So let's make sure that's working. I'm going to hit play, and if I shoot it, my fireball explodes when it touches. So we do know that the collision is working properly. Now, the only other thing I need to do here is add some audio sources. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is add a component, go to audio and choose audio source. And I'm going to add a second one because I'm going to have 2 different audio effects for here. So we're going to have 2 audio sources. Now, I'm going to be using some sound effects that I've created for a game I was working on. And if you want these sounds, I've posted a Dropbox link in the video description. So if you want to use these sounds, go ahead and grab them. If not, I know Unity has some built-in sounds, or you can go onto like Free Sound Archive. Just go and Google like free sound effects and you'll find some stuff you could use. So the first file I have is this desolate drone loop fixed long.ogg, and you can go over here and kind of listen to it. So it just sounds like some really nasty low-end windiness, and that's fine for what we're doing here. I don't need anything too specific. So what we want to do is specify one of these audio sources as that sound effect. So where it says audio clip here, I'm going to drag desolate drone right there. So an audio source makes sure that audio is coming out of the game object that it's attached to. So wherever our audio listener is, which is attached to our FPS controller, on the first person character camera. So our audio source is following our camera. So wherever our character moves, that's pretty much where our ears are going to be within the game. So when we attach an audio source to an object like this, that means that this object is going to interact with our audio listener from our camera, and it's going to basically take that sound in so we can hear it. Now, what I want to do is make sure spatial blend right here is set all the way to 3D. And I've talked about this in a previous tutorial. When you do this, it makes the sound like it sounds three-dimensional. So when my character moves closer to it, the decibel level is going to get louder, whereas if I move far away, it's going to get quieter. If I point my camera in such a way that the object is to the right of my character, I'm only going to be hearing it on my right channel versus all over the place. So for a first person sort of situation like we got going on here, I want to make sure that spatial blend is all the way up to 1. You can kind of do it like halfway if you wanted and put it 0.5, but for the sake of this, I'm just going to do 1. And now for our second clip, I have this sound effect called Naughty Hum Slow Rhythm Bandpass.ogg. I apologize for the long file name. It is what it is, but if we check this out, it's just some really bright sound effects, kind of sparkly sound. So we want this to be our second audio source. So I'm going to drag and drop that into the audio clip section for audio source 2. I'm going to make sure spatial blend is all the way up to 1. So now if we play this, you can hear the sounds coming from the object. As I move away, they get quieter. As I get closer, they definitely get louder. So now that that's in place, what we want to do is actually pass this information to an audio mixer so that we can further manipulate it, add effects to it, and do things like that. So what we want to do up front is come down here into your assets section and right click, hit create, and create an audio mixer. Now for mine, I already have an audio mixer that I made earlier before this tutorial, but I'm just going to call this audio mixer tutorial. And what you want to do is double click on this, and you should get a window coming up that says audio mixer, and you should see a master channel. Now, if your interface is kind of squashed like this, I find it's a lot easier to work if you raise this section out so you can see the whole channel strip. So you're going to sacrifice a little bit of your real estate on your viewport while you work in the audio, but it definitely makes it a little bit easier to work, in my opinion, when you do this. You don't have to. I'm just making a recommendation. So you'll see down here, first of all, we have mixers. I have an audio mixer that I was using before. Don't worry about that. You should only have the one showing up here. And then this audio mixer has only one snapshot associated with it, and it has one group currently, and then you can create different views. So you could create multiple audio mixers if you want. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to have the one. Now, an audio mixer can have many different channels involved in it, and it can also have a lot of different snapshots. And snapshots are basically different settings that can be applied to your audio mixer, and you're able to manipulate those snapshots and call on them from within the Unity API. So when you saw at the beginning of this tutorial video where I shot the object and it put on that flanger sound, that's the result of me working with snapshots and calling them through programming. So we'll hop into that in a little bit. What I want to do first is assign something to this master channel. Now, the first thing we're going to assign is going to be our FPS controller's footstep sounds. So if we actually click on our FPS controller in the hierarchy, where our first-person controller script is, go ahead and open that up. And you'll see at the bottom that the script has predefined jump and landing sounds for our footsteps. And our object also has an audio source attached to it. So even though we don't have a clip specified for the source, because we are specifying them here in the script, the audio source is simply serving as the spot where these sounds originate from. So if I hit play, we'll see, if you watch my master fader, as I walk and jump, you notice that no sound is coming through the master fader. So we can hear the sound, but it's not being assigned to anything that we can really manipulate currently. So for the ease of use, what we want to do, stop playing for a minute. is open up our FPS controller, go under audio source, and where it says output, you'll see it says none audio mixer group. So this accepts an audio mixer group value. So if we want to make sure that our jump and footstep sound effects are passed to this master channel so we can manipulate it, we want to go over here under the audio source of our FPS controller, and where it says output, click on this arrow next to it, and we're going to double click on the master fader under our main audio mixer. So whatever yours is called, mine's called audio mixer tutorial. I'm going to double click on the master. So now what this means is that the audio source that's attached to our FPS controller is going to be going right into this master fader. So now if we play, you'll actually see that audio data is being passed to the master fader as we jump and walk around. And what's cool with audio mixers is you see this button here, it says edit and play mode. If we choose this, we can actually lower this. So say I go down to 12 dB. You hear how much quieter that is? So you can actually make these changes within play mode itself, and unlike other things in Unity, these changes actually save when you're in play mode and you edit. So say I stop playing the game right now, you'll see that my negative 12 dB has stuck around even after I stop playing. So now that we've assigned the footsteps and the jump sounds to our master fader, what we want to do for the sake of this tutorial is I want to send the drone and the hum sound, the drone and the bright hum sound to their own channels so that we can manipulate them separately. Now, first thing I want to do, I'm going to change the name of this game object. So select the item and just left click twice in the hierarchy on it. I'm just going to call this drone bright sound. Sure, that's fine. So again, just like we assigned the one mixer to the audio source for our FPS control, we're going to do the same thing here. But before we do, what we want to add here is under the group section, you'll see a plus sign here. We're going to go ahead and hit that. And what you're going to see is it creates a second channel for us, just like the master fader. However, if we look under the group, we'll notice that the new channel is actually part of the master group. It's a child of the master, and you can expand those out in the hierarchy. You also have visibility settings, so you can, turn the eyes on and off for easier viewing if you need to. So this new channel, what I'm going to call this is drone. So this is going to be the one that the desolate drone file sends to. And then under the master group again, here's another way that you can add a channel. You can just right click on the master fader, or any of these really. You can add children to any of the channels that you create. I'm going to add a child group to the master again by right clicking on it and choosing add child group. And then for this one, I'm going to call this bright hum. So now I essentially have 3 channels. Now what's important here is that the master controls whatever its children are. And since everything falls under the master in some way or another, pretty much the master is always going to control all of the sounds that are being passed to the audio mixer. However, the drone and bright hum are individual channels for themselves. So ideally, if I affect the drone channel, it's only going to affect whatever sound is attached or whatever sound is sending to this channel, and then same with the bright hum channel. So what we want to do now is click our drone bright sound object and find the desolate drone audio source. So this one's my desolate drone, and where it says output, we're going to click the arrow here, and I'm going to send this to the drone channel. And then likewise for the lower audio source, the naughty hum file, we're going to click the arrow, the circle next to the output, and we're going to send this to bright hum. So now, to give you an idea of how this is all working out, let's hit play. And we can see my sound effects here in the channels. So let's hit edit on play mode. So because these are both children of the master, if I lower the master, I'm going to lose all my sound, including my footsteps. Now you'll notice my fireball still makes sound. And that's because I haven't passed those sounds to the audio mixer yet, which is something I'll have to remember to do. So let's raise the master back to 0. And Oh, I lost my sound effect. Oh, I know why this happened. Okay, I forgot one other thing. Go to Drone Bright Sound. We want to turn loop on for both of these guys. So under our audio sources, make sure the loop is selected. So we didn't get the bright hum back because the loop ran out of time. So let's hit play again. Redemonstrate things here. All right, so edit and play mode so we can change these. So again, the master controls all these sounds. So even though I've turned the master all the way down, you can still see where the levels of these sound effects are hitting. Even though we can't hear it, these channels are still taking in that data because those two sound sources are sending straight to these channels. However, both of these channels feed into the master. So that's dictating all these sounds. Now, say I want to lower the drone, which I do because the drone is actually a lot louder than, say, the bright hum. So you can see that we've lowered the drone entirely and we still have the bright hum. But let's turn the drone back up to, I'm going to say -6. -6 is usually a good spot. And likewise with the bright hum, we could turn it all the way down and leave the drone on. So, and again, just because I've lowered this by -6, it doesn't make it any less affected by the master than before. If I lower the master, we're still going to lose all of our sound out. Now, there's also some other controls you see here on the channels, such as the solo, mute, and bypass. So if we solo, all we get is our drone sound. And you'll notice we can't even hear my footsteps now because the only channel we're soloing, or the only channel we're on, is our drone sound right now. You can solo multiple channels. So for instance, I just soloed the bright hum and drone. So now I can hear those two, but I still can't hear the other effects that are being passed to my master. Likewise, I can mute a channel if I want. So I could just mute drone entirely, and then I could still get footsteps walking around. And then bypass is an effects bypass. Now, what a bypass essentially does, well, first of all, let me explain the effects here. So you see how the channel has an attenuation attached to it? Attenuation is the main effect for controlling volume. So this is attenuation. When I'm lowering and raising this fader on the master, that's the attenuation effect. Attenuation is attached by default. I can't change that at all. So I can't really do anything with the attenuation except move these around. If I left click on the actual channel, you'll see in the inspector that there is the attenuation option. You can also control it from here. Now, there's also effects that you can add that can be manipulated and bypassed. So let's say on the bright hum track, I can hit add down here. And let's say I go to, we'll do flanger, kind of like I had in the when I first started the tutorial and showed you. So for the flanger, let's just do something drastic real quick. Let's do 100% wet mix, 0% dry mix, a depth of 1 and a rate of like 4 hertz. So let's play. Alright, so you can hear that ridiculous flanger happening. Now let's try and bypass that. So hit edit and play mode and hit bypass on the bright hum channel. You'll hear how it got rid of the flanger. So that's how the bypass effect works. Now I'm gonna take the flanger off because I don't need the flanger on there right now. Now the last thing to go over the basic controls of the mixer, we have the view section. So you can save essentially just different views of your mixer. So as you start building a game, you might end up with a lot of different mixers, snapshots, and groups. So say I want to have a view of the mixer without the drone icon. What I can do is I can add a second view. I'm just going to leave it as view copy. Now, as you have this view copy highlighted, take off the, say, drone and bright hum view settings by clicking the eyeball icon next to them under the group section. Now, if I click on the normal view, I have all 3 of them. Now, when I click on view copy, I only have the master. So one thing I want to do is show you sort of how groups can be nested a little bit more. So under master, I'm going to right click on this and hit add child group. I'm just going to call this sounds. Now I'm going to left click and drag this above the drone sound. And then what I'm going to do is left click and then control click on drone and bright hum. And I'm going to assign these to the sounds channel by clicking and dragging them on top of it. And then you'll see that the sounds becomes its own parent channel, which is part of the master channel. However, drone and bright hum are now dictated by the sounds channel in general. So again, to demonstrate this, if I hit edit and play mode, I turn sounds down, I'm going to lose the sounds of the drone and hum. However, we'll still hear me walking around on the master. So it's very similar to what we were doing earlier with just the master channel. So something else I want to do, because it's really bugging me, is assign the fireball to the sounds channel. So go to your project window, open up your assets, and find your fireball prefab that we created in the earlier tutorial. Mine was called Fireball 2. And look at the audio source. And where it says output, left click on the little circle, choose the master fader, then choose the sounds channel. We're just going to choose sounds. We're not going to create our own channel for this. And then likewise, if you remember, this object has an explosion that gets played via a script. And if we look at that explosion, it's the detonator simple object. So go ahead and find the destroy object script and left click on the detonator simple explosion object, and it will bring you to the prefab. Left click on the prefab, and here where it says audio source, what we want to do is output this explosion sound to our sounds channel again. So now if we play and we hit edit and play mode, let's turn our sounds all the way down. So we lose the hum. We also lose our sounds, our ball explosion. However, we still get the walking and jumping sound effects. So let's raise our sound back up to 0. And now what we want to do is actually utilize snapshots to create the flanger effect when we shoot the object. So this is where things get a little bit more intricate. What we want to do is create a new snapshot. So first of all, where it says snapshots, let's go ahead and rename this one. So right click on it and hit rename. And we're just going to call this default. And then we're going to add a new one. And this is going to be called flange. So now what we want to do, let's go ahead and lower the drone by 6 dB because the drone's pretty loud within our scene. So I don't want it to be too loud to start with. And all this stuff's going to be standard. So now click on the flange effect. You'll see that the dB change is not there. If I click on default, we got -6 on the drone. The flange has a 0. Now what we want to do is add a flanger effect to the bright hum sound. So let's go to add and let's choose flange. And what we want to have here for the flange snapshot is we want 0% on the dry mix. So dry mix means how much of the normal sound do we want? We want 0%. When the flange happens, we want it to be full flange. So where it says wet mix, we want to put this all the way up to 100. And then for depth, what we want to do is just leave it at 1. And then for rate, let's just put it at like 2.5. If you're wondering what depth and rate do, I recommend going to Google and just looking into flanger settings, common flanger settings for sound effects, and you'll get a better idea of what these different settings do. So now what we need to do is click on the default snapshot, and you'll notice that the flange effect is different. So look over here on the inspector and switch to flange again. You'll see that the flange snapshot has the 100% wet mix, and the default snapshot has the default settings. However, on the default, we don't want any wetness. We want it to be 0%, and we want 100% of the dry mix. This is essentially turning the flanger off. So now if we look at our flange snapshot, we got 100%, 0% dry. And then if we look at the default, we got 100% dry, 0% wet. So if we play on our default snapshot, it sounds fine, it sounds normal. If we hit edit and play mode, go to the flange sound, you hear that change occur. Now, the goal here, you know, what we want to be able to do is have something more dynamic so that while we're within the game, we want to be able to trigger this snapshot for the flanger effect when we shoot and hit this object or when something touches this object. So in order to make this happen, what we need to do is create a script and apply it to our drone bright sound object. Now I'm going to go under my project view here, and I'm going to look at my assets. Now I have a JavaScript asset called flange timer. This is what I'm going to be using for this functionality. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop this object onto the drone bright sound object. And I'm going to show you what this script consists of so you can copy it down. Here's the actual script for the flange timer. Now, first of all, I'm going to talk about sort of what my goal is with this script. What I want to happen within my game is if something touches this object, I want to go from the default snapshot to the flange snapshot. I basically want the sound to change to that flanger sound effect, and I want the drone sound to come up, which is exactly what my flange snapshot does. So it's very basic, but to actually make it work, we got to do a little bit of scripting. So up here at the top, I'm importing the audio engine for Unity. So I do import Unity engine.audio. That gives me access to the audio mixer snapshot functions. And then I have a variable called 5 seconds, which is a float value. And you'll see where this plays in a little bit later. Then I have a variable called flange, which is an audio mixer snapshot. Now, again, this is part of the Unity audio engine. And this is what we basically will put our flange snapshot onto. And then likewise, we have a variable called no flange, which is also an audio mixer snapshot. And if I take a look here at my drone bright sound object with the script attached to it, we see here that the flange and no flange variables are here, and they both require an audio mixer snapshot to make work. So let me go back into the script. And lastly, I have a variable called start timer, which is a Boolean value set by default to false. And again, you'll see where this comes into play later. The first thing that I want to do, because the collision is what's being executed first, I'm going to jump down here to line 21. And I specify the onCollisionEnter function, which if you've watched the other tutorials, you kind of know what this is doing here. onCollisionEnter tells the object when it's being touched by some other object to execute something. So when this object takes collision, what this line right here is doing is it's calling on the flanger snapshot, and it's transitioning to that snapshot within a relative time of 0.1 float seconds. So the flange, if you recall, is defined up here as an audio mixer snapshot. And if we look in our Unity, it's going to be whatever audio mixer snapshot we put here. It's going to call on that. It's going to transition to that snapshot at a rate of 0.1 float relative time. So, you know, what this basically does determines how long of a transition do you want before it actually goes all the way to that snapshot. So, you know, if you put like 100 here, it's going to take longer to actually transition into that different snapshot. I'm doing 0.1 because I want it to happen almost instantly. I don't really want much of a transition time there. So that's what this line does. And then what I'm having it execute afterwards is a definition of the 5 seconds variable that I define up here outside of the functions. So 5 seconds now is trying to determine what is the current time of the game. And once it gets that, it's adding 5 onto that value. So we do time.time. Now the time class is built into Unity. You want to make sure there's a capital T on it. And the .time variable is part of that time class. And it basically returns what is the game's time since the game has started running. So what 5 seconds is seeking to do is find out that time, the running time of the game, and add 5 to it. And then we're going to use that value later to determine if 5 seconds have passed. And at that point, if 5 seconds have passed, we're going to revert back to our default state of audio mixer. Now, the last thing we have here is the start timer boolean, which we specified up here as being false. We turn it on to true. The reason for this is that we want this boolean to be used to execute an if statement within our update function for our game. So let's take a look at the update function now. Here on line 12, we have function update, which is the default Unity method. It runs every frame that Unity's running. We have an if statement, which is very simple. If start timer. What this is saying is if start timer is true, then it's going to execute something. The only time start timer should be true is when we get collided with. So basically, if our object is taking collision, we want to execute this if statement. And inside of the if statement, we have another if statement that says if time.time, so if the current game's time is greater than or equal to 5 seconds, which again we define down here as being the game's time plus 5, then it's going to transition out to the no flange snapshot, and it's going to reset the start timer boolean to false. So it's basically going to put our game back into the default state for not only sound, but for our boolean. So it might sound really confusing, especially because I'm not sure I'm very good at explaining programming. But if you just copy down what I have here, it should work for your object. Once you have all of it copied, make sure you save it, File Save or Control S on your keyboard, and then go back into Unity, and you want to drop that flange timer script. You want to drop that onto your drone bright sound object. And once we have it on the object, we want to find it in the component list where it says flange timer, expand it out. And for the flange option, what we want to do is click the circle next to it. And we want to choose the flange snapshot from the list. Where it says no flange, we're going to click on the circle again, and we're going to choose default. But now that we have flange and no flange defined, ideally this is going to work. So now when we hit play, let's open up our audio mixer and let's watch things. So first of all, we're on the default snapshot. That's good. That's what we want. Now let's find our object and let's shoot at it with a fireball. There we go. So now when it gets hit, you see how it changes the snapshot, and after 5 seconds, it brings the snapshot back to the default. And yeah, so that's it. If we take a look, again, these are diagnostics. If we look at the 5-second value and the start timer value, watch what happens when we hit. You see how they change? So start timer is now on, and 5 seconds is calculated at 54.86. So like right there, 65.5, the time of the game when I actually hit it was only actually 60.5, but because 5 seconds adds 5 to that, it's looking at 65.5, and then our script is determining, it runs that if statement to bring us back to the snapshot once the time of the game actually hits 65.5. So yeah, if we stop our game, that's pretty much how you use audio in Unity. That's how you use the audio mixer, and that's how you can use snapshots in the Unity API to sort of create a robust and dynamic audio experience within your game. Again, this is only scratching the very surface of it. You can do a lot of stuff with the audio mixer, and I'm sure there's even more within the API to handle audio snapshots and other events, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm looking at introductory stuff and I'm not going to get into it. So that's about it for the audio mixing, and thanks for watching and have a good day.